In this tutorial, we're going to break down a simple wet-on-wet technique. Wet-on-wet is a really broad phrase that describes any technique where you use wet paint on a wet surface, whether that's water or other wet paint. It can be used to create a huge range of different effects. As you know by now, one of the main principles of watercolor is controlling the amount of water, both on the paper and in the paint. First, we're going to practice on a piece of blank paper to develop a bit more control over the amount of water we use, and then we'll use the same techniques to produce this painting. I really recommend watching this whole tutorial through once, or at least scrubbing through it to get a rough idea of the whole process before you start. If you've been using an easel or tilting your paper before this tutorial, you'll want to stop doing that and place the paper flat. If you have the paper at an angle, then the paint will spread down the paper and not evenly across it. Take a blank sheet of watercolor paper and use a pencil and ruler to divide it into 3. Mix up your paints. I have used 5 colors: Prussian blue, blue-green, cerulean, cobalt, and a tiny bit of black, to create 3 contrasting shades of blue. To make things easy, I'll just refer to them as light blue, mid blue, and dark blue. Make sure you mix a lot of each of them. You're going to need it. Start by painting a thin wash of clean water onto the first section. You can always look at the paper at an angle to check the coverage. The most important thing is that it's a fairly even wash. You want to avoid any pooling of water at the edges. If you end up with too much water on the paper, you can always dry the brush off and then use it to lift off the excess water. As you can see, the paper is buckling up here. That's because I haven't stretched it. What a professional, right? Honestly, it doesn't really matter for this quick practice session, but if you're going for perfection, then check out the link in the description to our watercolor paper stretching video. This is what you're aiming for. Start with the lightest shade of blue. Start with just a little bit. You can always go bigger later. Gently dab the wet paper and observe how the paint spreads. Amazing, right? You'll notice that if you have more water on the paper, the paint will spread a lot more and produce a lot more even result. And if you have less water on the paper, it will spread less. The amount of paint you're dabbing onto the paper and the dilution of the paint will also affect the size of the bleed. Have a bit of a play with this. Try the other 2 colors. Try adding more paint or less. You could even add more water to the paper surface, or wait till it dries a bit and see how that works. The point is here to get a feel for how this effect works, and the amount of water and paint you need to use. Now let's move on to the last section of the paper. The areas are separate, so you don't need to wait for the first part to dry. Again, create a thin wash of water. This time, when you introduce the blue paint, you're not going to dab it on. Instead, brush it on like this, and then gently encourage the paint to spread with the brush. Try to leave little areas free from paint. By painting like this, we'll be able to create a mottled, varied surface, and it would be almost impossible to create the same painting like this twice. There's a little bit too much water here, so I've dried the brush off and I'm using it to pick up the excess. For the final part of the practice, I really want you to start developing some fine control of this technique. Start by drawing some random shapes on the paper. They don't have to be perfect. Then fill them with an even glaze of water. Try as best as you can to make the wash completely even and cover the whole shape, but also stay inside the lines. Remember to look at the paper at an angle to check if you've filled the whole shape correctly. Then gently dab a little paint into these shapes. You can see the paint doesn't spread further than the water that you've already painted on there. It's cool, right? And now I'm sure you can start to see the awesome possibilities of what you could create with this technique. Now you're ready for the real deal, right? The fact is, you probably don't even need my narration anymore. If you look at this painting, you can see exactly which techniques we've used to make this. Grab your Chromatek tutorial pad and locate this template, or download it from the description below and print it on your own watercolor paper. Stretch your paper. We're using a lot of water for this painting, and you don't want it to buckle. If you don't know how to stretch watercolor paper, then just check out our tutorial, linked in the description. You've already got the paints mixed from the practice session, right? Just make sure you've got enough to cover the whole of this painting. And squeeze out a little bit of mid-orange too. You're going to need that for the fish. Start by creating your clean water glaze. It's really vital here that you don't go over the fish. If the fish end up with any water on them, then just put that sheet to one side and wait until it dries, then start again. If the fish get wet, then the paint will spread over them. I like to do the big areas first with the flat brush, and then take a smaller brush and pull the water carefully around the outline of the fish, and then return to using the flat brush at the end to finish off. I'm constantly checking that I'm giving the paper a good even coverage by looking at it at an angle. Do your best to get the water right up to the edge of the fish, but don't worry if you miss a tiny bit here and there. You can correct this while the paint is still wet. Once you're satisfied that you've got a good even glaze of water all over the paper, you're ready to bring the colour. As usual for watercolour painting, we'll start with the lightest colour first, the light blue. Dab some paint down and help it spread to create the uneven mottled blue background. Once you've got the background done, use the same colour and dab on some more paint in random areas. As you can see here, after dropping the paint on there, I'm pulling it right up to the edge of the fish. Continue to do this throughout the painting. Next, while the paint is still wet, take the medium blue and add that as well. You can copy the rough placement of where I've put the colours, or just do your own thing. It's totally up to you. No two paintings are going to be exactly the same anyway. Then, while the paint is still wet, add the dark blue. If you find there's too much water pooling at the edges of the paper, you can dry your brush off and pick up the excess water like this, dabbing it off on a piece of tissue. Now leave the painting to dry. I wouldn't recommend using a hairdryer this time. When you're using techniques like this that rely on a lot of water, it's easy to blow the pigment across the surface, even if it's a super thin glaze, and blow drying it can eradicate some of those fine little details in the bleeding. You ready for the fish? Let's go! Mix up your mid-orange colour with just a little bit of water, so it's not too diluted. Use the detailed brush to paint the first fish with a thin glaze of water. Be careful not to go over the edges, and make sure you have a good even coverage of the whole fish. This part takes a steady hand and a little bit of practice. Now take a tiny bit of the orange paint and dab it onto the fish. I'd start with less than you think you need. You can always add more later. You don't have to follow me exactly. Put the paint wherever you like. Wow, look at that! Repeat this process for the second fish. And now my favourite part, taking the tape off. Something about this is pretty magical. It completely transforms the painting, going from the paint-covered tape to these clean white borders. There we go, check that out. You should have something that looks a bit like this. At the same time, no two paintings are ever going to be exactly the same. If you've made a hash of it, then don't sweat it. Go back to the beginning and practice the techniques a few more times, then give it another shot. When you get it right, you'll be super stoked. Before you check out the next tutorial, hit subscribe. You're going to want to keep up to date with all our new tutorials and watercolor techniques. some of which are ultra secret and have been passed down from generation to generation since ancient times. Or maybe not, but subscribe anyway. We've got a ton of awesome content coming your way. If you've enjoyed the tutorial or have any comments or suggestions, just drop them below. And tag your work on Instagram with #Chromatek so we can check it out. We'd really love to see it. As always, thanks for watching and sending happy vibes from Tokyo.